Welcome again to the DHF podcast. I'm your host, Sam, and I am a DHF board member as well as a church planner now. And I have with me as my co-host.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris Henderson. I know I've been on here a few times, so you guys already know who I am a little bit. But I'm the lead pastor of Windsor Christian Church here in Windsor, Illinois.
And I have with me a friend of mine. We went on a trip together recently, James Gilbert. You want to say hi and introduce yourself a little bit, James?
Sure. Hi, I'm James. I live in Florida. I'm the one with hair in this podcast. So hello, guys.
How do you guys know each other? I know that I am the one outside of the circle a little bit. I got into this a little last minute, but I know that you and Sam kind of have some type of connection. So if you guys just want to explain how you know each other.
Yeah, we have a connection. His name is Wayne Kent. I met Wayne in 1978. I was leading one of the Living Sound teams, which you may or may not have heard of. You know, we were what I think a friend of mine calls missionaries. So we traveled in lots of countries, and we had more than one team. A brand new team started in 1978. Now, I was playing keyboards and singing and doing some preaching, and Wayne joined the team as a keyboardist. Wayne was the keyboardist for our team 4. I was the leader of the team. I think it was team 3 at that point. And so we had that in common. And then we headquartered out of Tulsa. And when he started being music minister at First Christian in Tulsa, West Tulsa, we were in a little bit of touch together. And then, of course, he eventually became the pastor there and then moved on to Decatur. And we just managed to stay in touch. I had the privilege of taking him to Cuba on his first trip there, and then he just zoomed right past me, trying to be relevant to our platform here. He zoomed right past me and did a lot more than Cuba, I think, in terms of infrastructure and practical help than I've ever done. I just mainly need a microphone and just let me speak. Other than that, I'm of no practical value.
I would have to disagree. So our most recent trip, and I actually did a Zoom episode or a DHF episode on the trip, and we had done that for a previous trip of Wayne's over to Poland and Ukraine. And so Wayne had, after talking about his previous trip, he threw it out there if one of us wanted to come along in our Thursday Zoom group that he'd love to have us. And so I immediately applied for a passport, never had done that before. And this was my first overseas trip, period. I'd never even been to Mexico or anything close by, even though I'm just hours from the border, it seems like. I'd never done any of that. So I went through an international airport all alone, figured this stuff out, got picked up and then dropped off at a hotel. And then Wayne introduces me. Hey, here's my buddy, Jim. And then before I knew it, I was learning a lot about Jim's history with Wayne. And he actually knows some folks that I know here where I'm currently at in Visalia, California.
I do indeed.
That had done some missionary work as they did some music work. But we actually got to go on the ground and spend some time in Ukraine ministering to the Roma people. And in fact, Jim has kept up with it. So maybe if you give us like a mini update on some things that are going on in Ukraine as we need to continue to pray.
Well, another of our mutual friends is named Jan Barachuk. He spends half the year living in Wisconsin and half the year in Poland, which is his home country. We got to know Jan. Actually, Wayne knew him before I did. We got to know Jan in Poland when he was there during communist times as a very young guy and playing on a homemade guitar. He was playing with a group that became one of our honorary Living Sound teams. And so because they were active in ministry, Wayne's team just graciously, I think they got permission from headquarters, but they graciously just gave them state-of-the-art audio and instruments and mics. And Jan and his friends just took it and ran with it. And as you probably know, Sam, now the largest audiovisual company in all of Poland and one of the best in all of Europe was started out of that by one of the guys that was with that group. And he took it and was a very good steward. He ran with it. In fact, when we met him a year ago, he had just had dinner with Sting and his wife because they were evidently going to do some sort of a tour over there, and they wanted to use that company's equipment. So that was the background. Now, Jan, since we were there, since you and I were with him in Ukraine, he's gone back twice into war zones. We were in the southwest Ukraine with the Roma people in an area that is very close to the Slovakian border, which is a NATO country, and so they don't get very many shells hitting around there because they don't want a stray missile going into a NATO country. But they're deprived of their supplies, and so Jan has gone back there. In fact, he went to Roma people in southern Poland most recently. He's been 3 times on 3 missions. We helped him get a vehicle since you and I saw him, and so he has gone into that area. He's gone into Zaporizhia, which I heard got bombed again a day or two ago, and I mean droned and bombers flying over. They've really attacked, and Jan and his friends go in there and they continue supplying this time, and we were able. Our ministry was as small as we are, just my wife and me and my international headquarters you're looking at. So, but I always say the international headquarters is the second bedroom on the left. But we've been able to send about $180,000 the last year and a half, almost 2 years, and we sent the latest bit of that was to Jan so he could take bandages in. The Ukraine military said that they could cut down 70% on fatalities on the battlefield if they had proper bandages and tourniquets. So as you probably know, Wayne and Leslie took in tourniquets. I financed a bunch of bandages. So that's what's been happening since then. So yeah, we have a continuing presence there, and I'm concentrating on there right now as opposed to a lot of the other countries that I've majored on, which are mainly closed countries.
You've dealt with some folks kind of across the border, across the Iron Curtain, and even you hung out with this gentleman named Terry Law, and you wrote a book, Storm Chaser, the Terry Law story. Could you tell us just like a summary of that book?
Sure. Everybody called him Indiana Jones for Jesus. I think the guy was missing his fear gene. And it started when he was a little boy in Canada. He would, when other kids were running home, if there was a storm, he would literally, at 3-4 years old, he would stay outside, and wherever there was a lightning strike, he would run towards it. I mean, it was kind of a prophetic thing happening in his life, I think, because he spent most of his life, he passed away 3.5 years ago, but he spent most of his life chasing the storms, going into the places that other people were afraid to go. He would head in when other people were evacuating. And that was, I think, the main point that we realized about storms is that the eye is calm. And as long as you're in the eye of the storm, it's calm and you're safe. And that's where God's power is, spiritually speaking. It's very accurate, I think, biblically and theologically. This symbolism is very accurate. If you're where God wants you, Spurgeon said, as long as you're where God wants you, you're safe. As long as Jesus is in the boat with you, it's not sinking. And yeah, there's martyrdom, but the fact is, you are where you belong when you're in the center of God's will. And so Terry would go fearlessly from the time he was young. He would go, now mind you, he went through a period of rebellion. He actually built homemade bombs for a while and blew up structures with them. But once he repented, he went full bore into full-time ministry. He went to Africa for a while, then he came back. He went to Oral Roberts University. He had finished a couple of years already. He went back to Oral Roberts University, graduated summa cum laude. He was the valedictorian in 1969. But he had started this group called Living Sound. Well, we didn't have a name. We were just going to be students traveling on weekends. But the Lord really spoke to us that very first weekend, partly through a prophetic word that happened. And I'm kind of, if I describe myself as Anglicostal. So you can figure that on your own. But we knew that God had called us to the nations. And so we went back to South Africa first. And then in 1972, we went into our very first communist country was communist Poland, to the city of Krakow. And you've seen the outside of that nightclub, I know, Sam. It was back then operated by the Youth Communist Party, and they didn't know we were a Christian group when they invited us. There was an exchange student there from ORU who said she knew a group that did contemporary music, an American group, and no American group went in communist times. So they were eager to host this group. She just didn't tell them what kind of music we did. So
yeah, it was neat to see. For those that don't know, Krakow, and I'm probably saying it wrong, Jim, so forgive me.
It's Krakow. It's okay.
Yeah, it's very close to Auschwitz. And so some of our group went there kind of as a side thing because we just felt like it was good for us to see that in person.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, it was right there. We went and found it.
Yeah. So I got to go back 50 years later. I got to go back to that place and see it. Now it's a beautiful club on the inside. It's decorated nicely. They've revamped it, rearranged it. When we were there, it was very plain, pine tables, pine chairs, hardly any decoration at all in 1972. When they got upset with us after our concert and found out who we were and what we were doing, we didn't know it was the Communist Party either. I mean, I told friends that they were selling tickets. We were selling tickets. We were raising funds for communism, but they were selling tickets to revival meeting. So I think we won. But now I got to go back and visit that place a couple of times the last 2 years, which is extremely moving, deeply moving, because it was probably the most seminal night of my whole life to that point. So Terry, over the 50-some years we knew one another, before he passed away, Terry was really my mentor, really a spiritual father to me, other than my own dad, who was a pastor. And then when he passed away, it was August the 30th of 2020. We had just raised the funds to fly to Iraq. We were going to go to Iraq right after that. And of course, COVID prevented that. And then he passed away, not from COVID, but I think just his heart was worn out. The guy just buffeted his body for sure. He's probably in 85, 90 countries altogether. I may have veered away from the question you asked.
No, that was good. And Chris, feel free to jump in here, but I didn't look at the date when that story was published. What prompted you to write that book?
Well, I had told Terry way back in the early 2000s that his life story needed to be published. And he said, why would anybody want to read my life story? And I said, because it's been a grand adventure. And then we found out Oral Roberts was getting up in age. He's the founder of Oral Roberts University. He had been a mentor to Terry. And so I said to him, if you know where Oral is, and I knew where he was, we both did, if we need to go visit him and say thank you while he's still around. And so in 2006, we flew to California. He lived on a golf course, but he lived in a tiny one-bedroom condo, retired on $1 a year because, people wanted to send gifts to him anyway. And so he would see, every few days, he would see a group of pastors that wanted to come and say thank you. And I'm sure he probably lived on contributions. So we got to go out there and see him and one last time, and I was able to interview him a bit about Terry's life. And then after that, it was, I guess, probably 2013, Terry had to speak at Oral Roberts University to the chapel. And when he was speaking to the chapel, he said that the young people, the students, just began, at the end of it, when he was going to pray, he said they just began walking forward and piling money. These are students. They're broke. They began piling money on the platform and asking him, how can we do this? How can we go where you go? And he said there were hundreds of students all around me. And of course, he was always a good steward with the funds, and so that all went back into ministry. But he said to me after that, he said they were all around me, so hungry, crying, wanting to know, how did you get into this? We want God to use us too. So how did this happen? He said, Jim, I think you're right. Yeah, he didn't call me James. He said, Jim, I think you're right. I think, somebody needs to write my life story, and you're the man. Now, I had only ever written a book on my own. I'd co-authored two with him. And I I have a facility, I think, for editing, especially, but also for being more creative. But those were teaching books, and I'd never done anything biographical, and so I found out the structure of what is called a thematic memoir, which is when you're writing somebody else's life story based on their experiences. And I found out the structure from that from a very good teacher, and wrote the book. It took about 3 years actually altogether. But it hasn't sold a ton, but out of about 190 some reviews, they're almost all 5 stars. And the two most common remarks, by the way, it's on Amazon. It's called Storm Chaser, the Terry Law Story. But the two most common responses are, this ought to be a movie. I agree. I've been paid, so I wouldn't make any money, but I agree. And then the other is, I read it in one sitting. Well, it's a fairly long book, almost 300 pages, which these days is long for any American reader. That's just the way where we are. So it takes him to South Africa. Then founding the team, we ended up marooned in Mozambique because of a diplomatic row that was happening with other countries in the region. We got deported back to the U.S. The Lord intervened, took us back to South Africa. We actually got in where we wanted to be in the first place. So it took 3 trips across the Atlantic to get to our first real place we knew God had called us. And then after that, we started going to other countries, including Poland, and then beyond that into the Caribbean and into Asia, Southeast Asia. And then after that, we had different teams, and when the Soviet Union fell apart, we realized the teams had served their purpose, the music had served its purpose, and it was time to go into humanitarian relief. That was happening in Russia. People were starving. I remember he was distributing Bibles at one day in the wintertime in Russia, and a little old Russian lady said something that was obviously an insult. People who cuss in Russian really are eloquent. It can be beautiful, it can be ugly. And he asked his translator, "What'd she say?" And she said, "We can't eat your Bibles." And he said that just cut him to the heart. And so he kept on bringing Bibles in because he had permission to do it from Boris Yeltsin. But he also then began to bring in food, and then that led to other places. And a few years later, that led into Iraq, up in the north, about 3 months before Saddam was overthrown. Terry was already there with humanitarian relief. There was a Christian contact he had. It was kind of a almost secret Christian in the Iraqi government. Saddam made him. He didn't have a choice. Saddam made him serve, and so then the doors opened, and that man became important in the new government. And so then Terry was able to get up mainly into Kurdistan, and then eventually the Kurdish authorities were quite impressed. And so then I was going with him, and at that point we were suddenly interviewing prime ministers and defense ministers and army majors, and especially when ISIS came out, we actually were interviewing the general, was the head of the Peshmerga troops, who were really the Iraqi soldiers that defeated ISIS. We were just maybe 90 miles from where the front lines were. And so we're able to interview that guy about 3 months or maybe a year before actually ISIS was defeated. So we kept going back. Meanwhile, I was getting requests to go to Bulgaria and some other places, because if you're willing to go to closed countries, people want you to come. So I'd been to China, I'd been to Cuba several times. So I started going to Bulgaria, and then the Ukraine war started, and I said to my wife, "I know we need to do something." And so I said, and oddly enough, I think it's on Facebook. And I thought, how in the world fundraisers on Facebook, raise like $300 for my dog's surgery? How do you do that? But I really felt like it was the thing to do. And so we surpassed our initial goal in about 2 weeks. And I made a few phone calls, and that bumped it. And so instead of raising $50,000 or $75,000, we wound up that with a few phone calls, raising $130,397 and some change. I never remember the change, but we actually sent $133,000. By then, Wayne and I were in contact, and Jan, we were all in contact with each other and one other friend, and so we combined our efforts and started going into Poland. And then I was having medical issues, so I couldn't go on the first trip into Ukraine. But thankfully, those are taken care of. I have a nice pacemaker now. And so now we are able to go in. So there's lots of countries. Just to give you an idea, I had the privilege of going to Cambodia a couple of times. I was on the board of a ministry that works over there. And then we were able to have, I can't tell the details of this, no matter how small or large an audience is, but we were able I was able to attend the first legal prayer meeting in a country close by to Cambodia that hadn't had any freedom of religion since the 1970s. So the adventures continue.
So if I could, I want to bring it back just a little bit. You talked about the chapel service and how all those young people, and I attended ORU for a little bit. So I know, they train people to really think worldwide, right? We're going to be world changers for the gospel ministry. And that's a great emphasis that they really instill in their students, I think. But I think, sometimes, especially nowadays, right, missions has kind of taken a back burner a lot of times. I think churches and sometimes pastors and different believers are used to writing checks and saying, this is my mission work. Or even the more focused, I know that I think I saw in your bio that you're into geopolitics and analysis of cultural shifts and stuff like that. And so there's that motto of we need to focus here. Why are we sending people outwards? All those different things. But I think that, missions is much bigger than what sometimes we think of it as. And so what are some things that you would encourage people to kind of think in the way of getting to the nations and taking those bold risks? I mean, it's a big enough task sometimes for people to leave their own state or community, but let alone to go to like a Russia or Poland or Iraq and things like that. How do you encourage people to really take on those different risks for the gospel ministry?
Well, as 21st century Americans, we are I know that they say that other countries have have more happiness than we do, and that how you measure happiness depends on who's doing the polls. But we are the wealthiest nation in history, and the average American lives a higher standard of living than, the poverty we're trying to confess our way out of is the prosperity they're trying to confess their way into. We just have unprecedented wealth and unprecedented opportunity, but we are very, very consumer oriented. I think even in church, we're more consumer-oriented than we are producers. We're supposed to go to church to be a blessing, but constantly, and we even hear this from the pulpit, did you come expecting to receive? And so we instead of reaching out, we build kind of spiritual super Walmarts, Walmart super centers, and with better lighting, cheaper prices. You can be lost in a huge crowd. And so we tend not to think of ourselves as having the ability to really reach out and really produce. There are people who take one missions trip and then they've done that thing. And really your first missions trip changes you. It does a bigger work in you than you're ever able to do with the people there, because most of the time we're kind of ignorant of what we need to be doing anyway. And so it takes a commitment to keep going back if you can. I know inflation has made... Yeah?
Just to butt in just a little bit, not only can I just say I was saved, already serving in ministry, and it was transformational, but I actually served with an elder who was an elder in the church I serve now, who says, I wasn't actually saved until I went on a foreign mission trip and then understood what the gospel was. Yeah, I went to church, I clicked a box, but when I was over there and saw them worshiping, and when I actually understood what the gospel was and what it means, that's when I was saved. And it's a powerful testimony how he was changed.
Yeah, it is. It is. When you learn a second language, it teaches you a lot about your first. You don't think about grammatical structure when you grow up speaking a certain language, unless you go to school and then you forget it later anyway, because you're fluent by then. And when you go into another country, it definitely teaches you a lot. When you come home, think of how thankful you are when you get home. As beautiful as Poland is, but as bereft as Ukraine has become, you come back and you see what you have. And one of the things that happens after that first mission trip is that you come home feeling guilty, And then the second thing is you get really impatient and angry with the people around you who don't know what they've got, even though you were in that same boat right before you went. But, beyond that, that's if you're already committed. But what happens, like Sam asked, excuse me, I said, Sam, wait a minute. I'm getting all these bald heads and beards confused here. Sorry, I always tease. I'm sorry. You can turn my camera off if you want.
That's all right.
I know some of the people who are watching this, so they know that it's Jim Dobre talking. That Dobre is good morning or something, and a good day, I think it is in Polish. Anyway, Leslie Kent is to blame for that name. Thank you. But to answer you more specifically, I think we number one, we're not educated about the rest of the world because we have two oceans that have guarded us for over almost 300 years. We have two oceans that have guarded us on both sides, and we're a very large place. The word state is usually applied to a nation. We are 50 nations. In legal terms, we're 50 different countries united under one federal government, but we're supposed to be decentralized so that most of the responsibility is among those 50. And of course, that continues to be usurped by Washington, D.C. But we don't know about the rest of the world. And so I hear all this stuff going around now, and unfortunately, evangelicals especially are prey to conspiracy theories. A lot of this has to do with everybody's, I think, expecting the end times, or we're already in the end times, or whatever. And so they're really looking for signs for the end rather than looking for opportunities. And so I really, truly believe that. And so as a result, any conspiracy theory that lends itself to the we're out of here because things are getting worse is we look. God calls us the light of the world, and our bestsellers are about darkness. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I think that's a big problem, is that there's a certain fatalism that we have, and we're very myopic. We're not looking outward, we're looking inward. I hear people say all the time, well, we have our own problems here, and we need to take care of this, and we need to take care of that, and we shouldn't be sending money over there. And so our friends over there who have a horrendous existence right now. I have photos that I can't put on Facebook or Instagram or on my own website. It's jamesgilbert.org. Thank you. I can't put those there because they're either going to turn people off and they're nauseating, or they get censored by the social media. I have photos sent to me from people who took the photos of just awful, awful things that have taken place. So we don't realize how bad they have it and how good we have it. And so as a result, we tend to think, well, we've got problems too, and we send too much money. And besides, I heard that so-and-so's corrupt. And yeah, we hear that because what gets the news? If you look at the checkout counter in your grocery store, it's not full of the Washington Journal or National Review. It's full of tabloids. Why? Because that sensationalism sells. So what sells on social media, what makes your YouTube channel blow up more? It's if you're sensationalist. And so, unfortunately, there's kind of an evangelical sensationalism that also lets people hear what they want to hear, which is, well, we're out of here soon anyway. It's all been prophesied. You can tell I'm pretty exercised about this, but I think that's one big problem is we are very monocultural and very self-centered as a society. And, we just are. And I don't feel guilty for what I have, but I don't come home feeling guilty for what I have. I don't live like Christian asceticism and feeling guilty. And I have 3 pairs of shoes, and therefore there are two barefooted people in the world. It's my fault. I don't like that. I don't like socialism for Jesus at all. I'm thankful for what I have because it's easier to be a blessing if you got something to bless people with. But yeah. I'll go on here. I'll wax the elephant too long. So,
I was going to say I was amening a bunch of that, and so what? We had this conversation. Actually, some of us while we were over there. I had this conversation beforehand. So what? Some of the government in Ukraine is corrupt. The people are who we're going over there for, and yes, we need to do mission work here. We need to be missional here. But some of the folks that some of the harshest people that say, we don't need to spend money over there. It's not like they're being missional here either.
Yeah,
Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. It's all of them.
I'll say this about Ukraine. They have a leader who has integrity. All the rumors you hear about Zelensky are just fabricated. They're not even hard to disprove. If you want to see corruption in the federal government, just, look at DC and you'll see more corruption than you'll see in the Ukrainian White House or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and I believe that. But yet at the same time, I don't care whether the government is corrupt or not. It's the souls, the people, the individuals. We tend to like clump people together in this mass. And if you go there in person and you see the person face to face, then you start realizing it's individuals, not them or the other or whatever.
I have a friend that I haven't met in person yet. Now, one of our mutual friends let me know about her, but a friend whom I already dearly love. Thank you, social media, for that. She's a 30-something housewife and mother of two who lives in Kiev. She used to live somewhere else. She moved to Kiev to get safer, and they were bombed something like 25 nights out of 30 a little earlier, late last year, and it's happening again almost every night. Her little boy, who's about 5 years old, sleeps in the bathroom with a pillow on the floor, and you can see the toilet right by him because there's no windows in there, because when an explosion happens nearby, windows blow out and shards of glass fly all over. And he can't hear it quite as much. He can't see the light happening from the shells that are happening. It could be in the next neighborhood and it'll blow out your windows or shake it like an earthquake. That woman, 3 days after, and we met another woman like this at Life Church in Warsaw. But that woman in Ukraine, 3 days after the fighting started in 2022, got in her own car, loaded it with everything she could afford to buy, and drove all the way into the war zone and delivered it. And she's been doing that regularly ever since. We support her because she's been doing that regularly ever since. She's a successful entrepreneurial businesswoman in Warsaw. She does TV interviews and this, that, and the other. But she has no patience for people who want to pretend that everything's okay and they can go to their shopping mall that might still be open, and they just don't want to pretend that that's happening. She has no patience for those people. That's somebody who's risking her life more than I am. And she's living there, whereas I'm going in for 3 days at a time, 4 days at a time. She's living there, and she's seeing death all around her. She's hearing bombs drop. She's an attractive lady, but when she drives into Zaporizhia or Kherson or someplace like that, she's in her, friends have helped her get a little bit better vehicle, but she's driving in there wearing a helmet, flat jacket. She's ready. She's got a gun. She knows how to use it. Her husband is actually on duty in the war. And this is a Christian woman who's following a Christian conscience. We don't hear about that person. Instead, Christian bloggers don't, the ones with big blogs don't write about her. Instead, they're seeing some fake receipt that says that Zelensky took his wife on a shopping spree in New York. It's totally fake, totally fabricated, but it's more sensationalist. I don't want to sound cynical. I don't want to sound angry, although I'm not a cynic. I am a little ticked, but at the same time, I'm an optimist about the future. Jesus calls us the light of the world. We don't need to cover up our lamp with a bunch of end-time paperbacks, and that's what we typically do.
I was going to say, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I won't even get into the anti stuff because Sam's been in the groups. I get very passionate about it. I think whether you believe that we're in the end times, the rapture is right around the corner, that should be a call to urgency more than anything else to propel the gospel even more, right? Not this inner escapism is what I like to call it of, woe is me. And so the rapture needs to come because I can't handle this anymore. Like that in my opinion is
there's no rescue.
Yeah. And so, but I'll leave that at that. But I don't think that
let me say, I'm with you on that completely. I'm with you. It's not a matter of escape. It's not a matter of heaven being an alternative to earth. We're inheriting the earth. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But I don't think that we wrap our minds around what other people experience. I spent some time in a hospital the last week, and one of the nurses was a refugee from Africa originally, and he was sharing stories with these people and saying, you guys don't realize how well you actually have it. What you think is terrible isn't that terrible. And he shared stories of his childhood where, even before walking the many days to the embassy to try to get into a refugee camp and all those different things that went with it, he would spend days on the floor with his family because shells and guns, bullets were going through the houses, as two opposing forces were on either side. And as you hear those different stories, it makes you stop and go, man, we really do have it so good here. Like the things that we think are these catastrophic events really aren't that bad when you hold them up to the rest of the world. And where's the church in all this? I kept thinking to myself, even personally, sometimes we don't even want to do like the compassion sponsorships or international justice ministries, with the human trafficking. That's too much money. How much money do we spend on subscriptions a month? I could say Starbucks. I'm guilty of that, right? Yeah. Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, fast food, all these different things, while the rest of society or the rest of the world is struggling to rub two pennies together. And so I don't know what the solution is to it. I don't know that there's an easy solution, but I definitely think, what you're talking about is completely true. We need to figure out a way for people to start taking that risk and to say, as long as I'm in God's will, I'm good. I'm in his hand. He's protecting me. He's guiding me. And what comes is his will anyway. But I'm going to be that voice. I'm going to be that light. I'm not going to let my salt, lose its taste, so to speak. And so, I don't know what Terry had told those students. I would definitely love to have been in that chapel service and heard some of his advice on that. But
I'd rather be motivational any day. I mean, the only reason I answered the way I did was because you asked me a very provocative question about what holds us back, and so I answered it. But it'd be the worst thing in the world to go around complaining about what people complain about and to be against what everybody's against, because then you're still against something. Christians are better known for what we're against in our society than who we're for. Not what we're for, but who we're for. So it's. I did a video course, co-authored a video course called the Worldview Course by a friend of mine and me. We call ourselves the Worldview Guys. So if you go to worldviewcourse.com, you'll see it. But one of our mottos for that was not to man the lifeboats, but grab an oar. It's not a matter of ringing the bell because the ship's going down. It's a matter of grabbing an oar. If the ship's going down, save it. Look at the end of the Bible. It's not about us leaving. It's about God coming to dwell amongst his people forever. Revelation 21. It's about him coming to live amongst his people forever. We are heirs. We are inheriting. And we have been saved to be ambassadors. Quite literally, we are ambassadors for a new kingdom. And that kingdom right now is in two places. But eventually, guess where it's going to be? Here. Maybe there's a big home makeover or whatever. But the fact is, this is our inheritance.
We inherit the earth.
Think like landlords, we're landlords, future landlords, not renters. And those two kinds of people think very differently.
Absolutely.
Now, how do I steer this back?
Sorry.
Oh, no, it's great. We only have so much time, and you have given us some inspiration, definitely addressed some things. I would love it if you would just share from your perspective, like one story that maybe we'd find in Storm Chaser, which my copy is on the way, so I don't have it yet, have not read it yet. Maybe just one story from your perspective on the ground, serving somewhere dangerous that you did with Terry Law.
Well, actually, I'll tell you the end of that book was. There was a man in northern Iraq who was arrested for preaching the gospel and converting Muslims to Christians, and false charges were leveled against him by local religious authorities, who then pressed legal charges against him. You have to understand, Kurdistan is semi-autonomous from the rest of Iraq. They won't give them their freedom to be a country because they're the cash cow. They're the most prosperous part of Iraq because of good work ethic, for one thing. And so this man had been put in prison, and when he was a friend of Dr. Law, of Terry Laws, and so Terry said to me, Jim, I've got to go over there. I got to do something. I need to help try to get this guy out. And so he was going to go over and meet with the defense minister that we had an oblique connection with, had never met. And it was actually the way those two men became like brothers. This Muslim defense minister, well, nominally Muslim. They say Kurd first, Muslim second, but they're nominally Sunni Muslims. But he's a peaceful man. Even though he's a defense minister, he's a peaceful man. They met, and Terry and I talked it over, how to present this in a positive way rather than a negative way. Rather than let this man go, it's not right, is if you gave this man his freedom, it would be a historic thing, more historic than we realized at the time. It would be a historic thing if you got his freedom, and then there would be good publicity for Kurdistan in the West. And so the guy really believed that, and he went to his boss, who was the prime minister, and behind the scenes, there's the founder of the party. And so they granted, for the first time in their history, they granted clemency, kind of like a presidential pardon. They call it executive amnesty. And they granted it to this man. And so the last story in the book is when Terry flew to, I've said Athens, Greece in the book. It's actually another country. We wanted to stay safe with this. So we have a pseudonym in the story, but the story is true. Flew to that part of the world, and on his 70th birthday, this man and his family came out through customs. They were free, completely free. He had been tortured in prison. They're completely free, and Terry was so embarrassed. He didn't like a lot of. He's the kind of you shake hands with, you don't give a big hug. But this guy just grabbed him around the waist and then sank to his knees. Terry said, I'm standing there in the middle of the airport, and this guy's got me around the knees, and I'm trying to hold my balance, and he's just crying and thanking me and thanking me and thanking me. He said, Jim, it was really embarrassing. So they went out to dinner that night. It was Terry's 70th birthday. Talk about symbolism. It was his 70th birthday, April the 8th. And when they let's see, April the 8th of 2013, when they got out of the airport, he took them to dinner, and here this storm chaser is taking them to dinner. And there's more to this story, but I will end it by saying this. On the night that they were celebrating in one country, several hundred miles away in eastern Turkey, there was a group of radicals getting together, announcing the formation of the Islamic State that commonly is called ISIS. They were announcing their existence on the very night that Terry's 70th birthday was happening, when he'd gotten someone out of prison, and that's where Storm Chaser ended. We, of course, after the book was published, then ISIS did come into the news shortly after that.
Right.
There was all kinds of horrors going on. We were going to go, I was with him, we were going to go in 2017, we were going to go in to Mosul, which is, by the way, Mosul, the city of Mosul is ancient Nineveh, where Jonah was. But we were going to go in there, and they said, well, you can't go all the way there. There's still some snipers. We'll let you just go a few miles to a smaller city where there's been a substantial Christian population. We got to the edge of that city to a checkpoint, and all of a sudden men came running around, some of them barefooted, but we were surrounded. Within about 10 minutes, we were surrounded by over 100 men with AK-47s, all loaded and all screaming. And it turned out they weren't even Iraqis. They were Iranians who'd come across the border because General Soleimani, the one that President Trump droned after that, he got a tip that a dozen North Americans, we were in a convoy, and a dozen North Americans were there, and we got surrounded by all these guys. I had a 50 caliber machine gun on top of an old Toyota Tacoma pickup truck aimed at my vehicle, and there was a rocket launcher behind the fourth vehicle in our convoy. And for me, that was a remarkable thing. It makes a good story. for Terry, it was such a day at work, a normal day at work. And he forgot to tell his wife when he got home, and they went out to dinner with another couple. And he started telling this story to them, and his wife said, my jaw dropped. Why didn't you tell me about this? Meanwhile, we're friends now with the Orthodox Archbishop of Mosul. We become friends. And when we came back from that terror attack, we got out after only about an hour. We were rescued through diplomatic. All the right phone calls were made. I remember I was sitting with the assistant minister of religion. I was sitting right behind him, and I knew he had a satchel full of papers and he had a cell phone. But then he pulled out an Uzi submachine gun and laid it on the right in front of me. He laid it on the armrest, but it was pointed at me, and so I was a little nervous that he'd grab it the wrong way, and I asked him to point it at the radio instead because I was in the back seat. So, and he was literally riding shotgun at that point. So we get back and we're rescued, and we met with the Archbishop of Mosul, the Syriac Orthodox Archbishop of Mosul, who'd become a friend, as I said. And he almost, it was everything but yawn. It was so old hat to him. My heart's still beating. I had a bit of trauma a little later on from that, but to Terry, it was no big deal. To that guy, he said, very calmly, he said, well, now you know what we live with on a daily basis. Well, now that's happening in Ukraine. It's happening in different parts of the world. You don't necessarily have to go into dangerous places. I only go to these closed countries because that's where God's called me to be. I never feel like a hero. In fact, I feel like a blooming coward a lot of the time. But I discovered that you never feel like a Superman. But when you're in a situation, God gives you the grace to be there. When I was sitting in that Land Cruiser, and just outside my thankfully shaded tinted glass on my window, there was a man probably 22, 23 years old with a loaded rifle. And I said to myself, Gilbert, I don't call myself Jim. Gilbert, ever since you were a little kid, you've wondered, would you be willing to die for the name of Jesus? Now, what if it happens today? Are you willing? And I had wondered that my whole life. I had been in ministry for 50 years at that point, well, 48 at that point. And yet I had always wondered, if it was really down to that, would I be willing to die for the name of Jesus? And sitting there in that, pardon me, I'll get emotional here. Sitting there in the back of that Land Cruiser, I realized, if they pull me out of this, I'll die for that name. That grace was there. You see the goosebumps here. The grace was there for when I was in this situation. No other time would it ever have been there. God gives you grace. If he tells you to go somewhere, you're safe when you go. God gives you grace. And if he doesn't rescue you, what did those Hebrew men in the fiery furnace say? Nevertheless, if he doesn't save us from it, we're still not going to bow to you. I think we got to do that. We have to.
There's a Mercy Me song, Even If, about the Hebrew children in the furnace. And it's such an important lesson that I don't think we teach enough in churches. So often we focus on prosperity and good, this, that, and the other. Yep. But even if, that kind of faith needs to be nurtured.
Yep.
Well, Jim, I definitely see having you back on to talk more. I enjoyed our time together overseas, and I really enjoyed this. And I hope that those listening got some blessings and some encouragement and a little bit of knowledge about how things are around the world, even today, right now. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of the DHF podcast. If you'd like to know more, you can head to discipleheritage.org to hear about our ministry. We're a network of churches really caring for other churches and equipping churches to do what they are already doing. And then if you want to learn more about Jim and his ministry, you can head to jamesgilbert.org. And we hope that you'll like, share, comment, all those appropriate things, and that we will catch you on the next one.